Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city. And we start. The dining room in the Harris family home in the coastal town of Mayflower glowed with the soft amber light of a crystal chandelier. The massive table, made of polished mahogany, was set with impeccable precision. Porcelain plates, silver cutlery, wine glasses that shimmered in the light like prisms. The aroma of roasted lamb with rosemary wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the slight saltiness of the Atlantic breeze that filtered through the slightly open French doors. Outside the windows, the ocean rustled under the heavy September sky, its rhythmic waves whispering secrets that the Mayflower preferred to keep under lock and key. Savannah Harris, 38, sat at the head of the table, her phone next to her plate, the screen flashing every couple of minutes with notifications she hadn't bothered to silence. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a low bun, and her seafoam-colored silk blouse emphasized her elegance and slight tiredness. She was telling a story about a client who was demanding a beach house with good energy when the phone vibrated again. Savannah glanced at him, the corners of her lips twitching into a half-smile, and she turned him over so the screen was facing down. So, she continued, carefully slicing the lamb, I tell her, ma'am, the only energy here is the one that will ruin you doing repairs. She didn't even smile. Mike Harris, 42, laughed from across the table, his deep voice filling the room with warmth. A successful cardiac surgeon, he had a face that inspired confidence in his patients. A strong chin, kind brown-green eyes, and slightly noticeable gray hair at the temples, hinting at wisdom but not age. He wore a fitted jacket over a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms from a weekend on a yacht. You have a talent for people, Sav, he said. Always was. Their daughter, Chloe, 16, rolled her eyes so hard it almost came out loud. She was slumped in her chair, her dark hair falling over one shoulder, her fork lazily pushing the mashed potatoes around the plate like an artist rejecting his work. God, Mom, why are you even bothering with these people? They're idiots. Chloe, Mike said softly but firmly, watch your tone. Savannah waved her hand, dismissing the tension. She's fine, just expressing himself. The phone vibrated again, and this time she picked it up and ran her finger across the screen, reading the message before putting it down with a small sigh. Ethan, their 10-year-old son, sat quietly next to Chloe, his eyes glued to the peas he was carefully lining up in a perfect circle on his plate. He had not said a word since dinner began, his small hands moving with the precision of a watchmaker. Ethan's autism made social situations a maze for him, but family dinners were a ritual Savannah insisted on. This is how we stay in touch, she said, although today her attention seemed to be focused on the phone more than on her son. The Harrises were the golden family of the Mayflower, the ones who appeared in the town's glossy brochures, smiling against a backdrop of yachts and white-fronted mansions. Mike's practice was thriving, Savannah's real estate deals were closing with the ease of a summer tide, and their home, a restored Victorian manor with verandas and ocean views, was the envy of all the neighbors. But beneath that surface something was smoldering. An invisible crack, widening every day, ran through the heart of their ideal life. The dining room was quiet, only the clanging of cutlery and the occasional muttering of Ethan counting peas breaking the silence. Chloe stabbed a piece of lamb, her voice cutting through the silence. Well, Dad, you save lives all day. Mom sells houses to rich, crazy people. What should I do with my life? I'm not good at anything at all. Mike put down his fork and leaned forward. You're good at a lot of things, Chloe. You are smart, creative. I just haven't found mine yet. Yeah, sure, Chloe muttered, glancing at her mother, who was typing something on her phone. Mom, are you even listening? Savannah's head snapped up, her blue eyes narrowed. I'm listening, Chloe, and I'm still working. Multitasking. Try it sometime. Chloe snorted. Job? You're probably texting Aunt Lauren again about her divorce. Mike gave Savannah a look filled with 1,000 unspoken conversations. Sav, Maybe the phone can wait until the end of dinner. Savannah's smile was tight as a string. This is a client, Mike. You want to keep the lights on in the house, right? She put the phone down, but not before taking one last look at the screen, her face unreadable. Ethan's voice, quiet and precise, interrupted the moment. 27 Ps, he announced, without taking his eyes off the plate. It's a prime number. Mike smiled, ruffling Ethan's hair. Here is my mathematician. You'll still overtake me, baby. Ethan didn't look up, but his lips twitched in a hint of a smile. Savannah watched them, her face softening for a moment, but the phone lit up again. This time she didn't touch it, but her gaze lingered on the screen, her fingers twitching as if out of habit. The tension at the table was alive. It swirled around everyone like smoke. Chloe felt it in the way her mother's attention slipped away, in the way her father's smiles carried a hint of weariness. Mike felt it in the two long pauses, in the way Savannah's laughter no longer reflected in her eyes. Savannah felt it in the weight of her phone, whose notifications were her lifeline, connecting her to something beyond this table. And Ethan, although he couldn't express it, could feel the energy in the room shifting, like a melody played in the wrong key. The Mayflower was a city built on appearances. Its cobblestone streets and whitewashed storefronts hid old money and even older secrets. The Harrises fit in perfectly, their lives a carefully choreographed performance. But today the script went wrong. The lines were spoken, but the subtext was louder. Well, Mike said, trying to steer the conversation in a safe direction. Chloe, how's your history project going about the Mayflower settlers? Chloe shrugged, her voice dripping with teenage contempt. Fine. Just a bunch of dead people who cheated the locals. Just like this city, to be honest. Savannah laughed, the sound harsh, fragile. Come on, Chloe, the Mayflower isn't so bad. We have charm, community. And a yacht club full of freaks, Chloe interrupted, like that guy who always sticks to you at house showings. What's his name? Derek. Savannah's face froze, her fork frozen in midair. Derek is a client, she snapped, and he's harmless. Mike's jaw tensed, but he didn't look at her. He turned to Ethan instead. What do you think, baby? Do you like living by the ocean? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was already putting the peas into a small green tower. The waves are loud at night, he finally said. But I like them. They don't lie. The words hung in the air, simple but heavy. Savannah's phone vibrated again, and this time she grabbed it, standing up abruptly. I need to answer, she said, already halfway to the kitchen. It's urgent. Mike stared after her, his face unreadable. Chloe muttered something under her breath, too quietly for him to hear. Ethan continued to fold peas, not noticing the storm that was brewing around him. In the kitchen, Savannah leaned against the marble countertop, her phone pressed to her ear. The voice on the other end was low, insistent, familiar. She spoke in a whisper, her eyes constantly darting to the dining room door. I told you, not now, she hissed. I'm at dinner. The voice answered, and her face hardened. She pinched the bridge of her nose, exhaling sharply. Okay, tomorrow. But this can't go on any longer. You know that. She ended the call, her hand lingering on the phone as if it might burn her. She stood motionless for a moment, the humming of the refrigerator the only sound. The kitchen was her kingdom, modern appliances, fresh-cut flowers, but today it felt like a cage. Savannah looked at her reflection in the window. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect life. And yet the woman looking at her was a stranger. In the dining room, Mike was coaxing Ethan to try a piece of lamb, his voice patient but tense. Chloe took out her phone, scrolling through Instagram, her plate abandoned. The light from the chandelier cast long shadows on the table, turning the scene almost cinematic, a picture of a family on the verge of splitting. Savannah was back, her smile was back in place, but it was a mask, and Mike saw right through it. He always saw. Everything is fine? He asked in a neutral tone. Client urgency, she replied, sitting down. I've already figured it out. Chloe didn't look up from her phone. Yeah, of course. Mike's hand squeezed his glass of wine, but he remained silent. Instead, he raised his glass in a toast. For the family, he said, his voice level. For us. Savannah clinked glasses with him, her eyes meeting him for a split second before sliding to the side. For us, she echoed, but the words sounded empty, like a promise already broken. Ethan, still focused on the peas, did not raise his glass. Instead, he whispered, 29. Another prime number. Outside, the ocean roared, its waves clinging to the shore. The Harris estate stood like a sentry against the darkness, its windows shining with a warmth that did not reach the hearts inside. The Mayflower slept, its secrets hidden behind closed doors, but the crack under the Harris family widened. Today, there was only a push. The earthquake was approaching. Savannah's phone was silent for the rest of the dinner, but its presence was heavy, like a ticking bomb that no one acknowledged. Mike cleared away the plates, his movements measured, as if he was holding himself together by force of will. Chloe disappeared into her room, her headphones drowning out the world. Ethan lingered at the table, counting peas, until Savannah gently led him upstairs. In the quiet of the kitchen, Mike was left alone, loading the dishwasher, his mind replaying the evening. How Savannah's eyes darted to the phone, the bitterness in Chloe's voice. Like Ethan's words, they don't lie, they cut deeper than they should have. He did not yet know what was coming, but he felt it, as a sailor feels a storm before the clouds gather. Upstairs, Savannah was sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone in her lap. She opened the messages, her thumb hovering over a name she shouldn't have typed. The screen glowed, casting a cold light on her face, and for a moment she looked like a woman who was drowning. The perfect facade held for now, but nothing in the Mayflower remained buried forever. No secret, not a lie, not a betrayal that could burn a family to the ground. The silence in the Harris house was as fragile as thin ice over a raging river. A week has passed since that family dinner, where tension hung in the air like an invisible poison. Michael Harris sat in his office on the second floor, staring at the dark laptop screen, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Savannah, his wife with whom he shared 17 years of his life, became increasingly alien. Her detachment, her constant attention to the phone, her evasive answers, all this added up to a disturbing picture that Michael could not ignore. The office was his fortress. Walls of dark oak, shelves lined with medical references, and a large window overlooking the ocean, whose waves crashed against the rocks of the Mayflower. Usually he found peace here, but today even the sound of the sea seemed ominous. Michael leaned back in his chair, his fingers nervously tapping the armrest. He remembered moments that had previously seemed insignificant, how Savannah would look away when he asked about her day, how her laughter became sharper, how she would even take her phone into the bathroom. These were small things, but they accumulated like sand in an hourglass, and now the time for doubt was running out. Downstairs, the front door slammed as Savannah returned from showing the house. Her heels clicked on the marble floor. Her voice answering the call was soft, almost affectionate. "Yes, I will send the documents in the evening," she said, but there was something else in her intonation, something that made Michael clench his fists. He didn't want to be the husband who suspected his wife of cheating, but her behavior left less and less room for other explanations. Over the next few days, Michael became more attentive. He noticed how Savannah stayed late at work, citing difficult clients. Her meetings lasted until late in the evening, and she returned home with a slight blush, which he had once mistaken for fatigue. He saw something different in it now, a spark that wasn't there when she looked at him. Her phone became her shadow. She did not let go of it, even when she was preparing dinner or putting Ethan to bed. Savannah used to leave it on the kitchen island, not caring who might take it. Now she guarded it like a state secret. One evening, while Savannah was in the shower, Michael noticed her phone on the bedside table. It was a rare moment when he was left without her supervision. His heart began to pound and his fingers trembled over the device. He knew her password, she hadn't changed it for years, but something stopped him. Fear, guilt, he just stood there, looking at the screen that suddenly lit up with a notification. The message was from a contact signed as work. The text was short. "I can't stop thinking about you." Michael blinked, trying to convince himself that this was a mistake, that this was just a customer with bad manners. But deep down, he knew it was a lie. He returned to the office, his mind in turmoil. He tried to remember when it all started. 6 months ago. Year. Savannah had always been outgoing. Her job as a realtor required flirting with wealthy clients, but she used to share stories with him, laugh at their eccentricities. Now she was silent, her stories about work were as sparse as reports. Michael felt that he was losing her, but did not know how to stop this process. Michael was a surgeon, a man whose life depended on precision and control. He was used to solving problems, but this was different. He couldn't just ask Savannah. Her evasiveness would only increase his suspicions, and a direct question could ruin everything if he was wrong. He needed facts, proof, something that would either confirm his worst fears or allow him to breathe freely. During his lunch break at the hospital, he locked himself in his office and opened his browser in incognito mode. He felt like a criminal, but curiosity was stronger than shame. He looked for ways to check his wife's phone, scrolling through articles about spying and monitoring apps. Most solutions required physical access to the device, which he could not guarantee Savannah was too careful. Then he came across a website that offered discreet remote access to phone data. It sounded like a scam, but the reviews were convincing, and Michael, putting aside his last doubts, filled out the form. He indicated Savannah's number, paid for the service through an anonymous wallet, and received a letter with instructions. In 72 hours, he would be given access to her messages, calls, and files. When he hit send, he felt nauseous. He had crossed the line, and there was no turning back now. He tried to convince himself that he was doing this for the sake of his family, for the sake of Chloe and Ethan, but the truth was simpler. He couldn't live with ignorance. 3 days later, on Thursday evening, Michael was sitting in his office when an encrypted file arrived in his email. Savannah was at the evening show, Chloe went to a friend's party, and Ethan slept in his room, surrounded by puzzles that helped him cope with anxiety. The house was empty, only the sound of the ocean outside the windows reminded of the outside world. Michael opened the file, his hands shaking. Data appeared on the screen, call logs, messages, even deleted files recovered from Savannah's phone. He started with the messages, scrolling through them until he found a conversation with a work contact. What he saw was like a blow to the chest. Work, you were great today. When will we see you again? Savannah, soon. But you know how dangerous it is. Mike doesn't suspect anything. Work, he shouldn't. We are careful. Savannah, I can't take this long. This is too much. Michael reread the messages, his throat tightening. He scrolled further, and every word was like a knife. They discussed meetings at motels outside the city, evenings when Savannah said she was late at work. There were hints of intimacy, moments that she hid behind her absences. But the worst thing was the photographs. He opened the media folder, and his eyes fell on a photo of Savannah in black lace lingerie with a smile he hadn't seen in years. The photo was sent to work 3 months ago with the caption, "Only for you." There were others, frank, intimate, each like a hammer blow. Michael felt his world crumble. He closed the laptop, his breathing became ragged, and the emptiness grew in his chest. He sat in the dark, trying to comprehend what he had seen. The woman he loved, the mother of his children, had been lying to him for months, maybe years. He didn't know who Job was, but that didn't matter anymore. The betrayal was real, and it was tearing him apart. The next day, Savannah acted as usual. She cooked breakfast, joked with Ethan while helping him put together a puzzle, and even hugged Michael as she left for another meeting. Her touch burned him like hot iron. He looked at her, trying to find the woman he knew, but all he saw was lies. Her smile, her lightness, her care, it was all a performance, and Michael now knew the script. He didn't say a word about what he found out. He watched her like a scientist watching an experimental subject, noticing every detail. How she checked her phone when she thought he wasn't looking. How her voice trembled when he asked about her plans. How she avoided his gaze when he tried to start a conversation about them. Chloe, always sensitive to change, noticed the tension. At dinner, she threw her fork on the plate and blurted out, "What's going on with you? You are like strangers." Savannah laughed, too loud, too false. Chloe, don't make things up. We're just busy. Michael was silent, his gaze fixed on Savannah. He wanted to scream, wanted to throw the truth at her, but Ethan, sitting next to him, was intently lining up the peas in a line. His son, his family, they were the reason he held on. He couldn't destroy their world. Bye. That night, Michael lay in the dark, listening to Savannah's steady breathing. He knew she was pretending to be asleep, her body was too tense. His mind was torn between pain and anger. He thought about their years of marriage, how they had built this life together, how he had supported her when she gave up her career for the sake of her family, and all this was crossed out by her lies. He stood up, went down to the office, and opened the file again. He reread the messages, looked at the photographs until the pain turned to cold rage. He didn't know what he would do next, but one thing was clear. He would not allow Savannah to continue this deception. She destroyed their family, and now she will have to pay. Outside the window, the ocean roared, its waves crashing against the shore, as if reflecting the storm in Michael's soul. The Mayflower was asleep, but in the Harris house, the war had already begun. And that was just the beginning. The silence in the Harris house was as thick as the pre-dawn fog over the Mayflower ocean. It had been a week since Michael saw the messages and photos on Savannah's phone, and every day the truth ate at him like rust on metal. He did not say a word to his wife, did not throw her lies in her face, although rage and pain burned him from the inside. Instead, he remained silent, watching, collecting the pieces of her betrayal, like a surgeon preparing for an operation where the slightest mistake could be fatal. Michael sat in his office, the window was open, and the salty wind from the Atlantic filled the room. On the table in front of him lay a notebook in which he wrote down his observations, a habit developed over years of medical practice. He noted the times Savannah left for meetings, her excuses, her gestures. This helped him maintain control and prevent his anger from escaping. But every new item on this list was like another nail in the lid of their marriage. Savannah didn't seem to notice. She continued to play her role: caring mother, successful realtor, loving wife. In the morning, she prepared oatmeal for Ethan, helping him make patterns on the plate with a spoon, laughing at Chloe's jokes, even touching Michael's hand when she served him coffee. But her touch now seemed poisonous to him, and her smile a mask behind which hid a woman he no longer knew. Michael felt he had to do something, but didn't know what. Accusations without a name, without the face of her lover, would be empty. He needed to know who it was, who destroyed his family, and he decided to find out. Michael started small. He began to watch Savannah more closely, noticing details that had previously escaped. He noticed how she checked her phone when she thought he wasn't looking, how her fingers hovered over the screen before answering a message. He began to remember the excuses she used. The client wants to see the house in the evening. Urgent deal, needs to meet with a lawyer. These phrases sounded more and more often, and each time they seemed less and less plausible to him. One evening, when Savannah said she would be late for a company meeting, Michael decided to check. He waited until she left and then followed, keeping his distance. Her white Lexus turned not toward downtown Mayflower, but toward a motel on the outskirts, a cheap place with a flashing neon sign where no one asked questions. Michael parked across the street, his heart pounding like a hammer. He saw Savannah enter number 12, her silhouette flashing through the window before the curtains were drawn. He didn't get out of the car, didn't knock on the door. He just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, and watched his world crumble. An hour later, Savannah came out. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and a smile played on her lips that he had not seen at home. She got into the car and drove away without noticing him. But Michael did not follow her. He stayed, his eyes glued to the door of number 12, waiting to see who would come out next. 10 minutes later, the door opened, and the man walked out into the parking lot. He was tall, with broad shoulders, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His face was in shadow, but something in his gait, in the way he adjusted his collar, seemed familiar to Michael. He couldn't see the details, but this feeling like a cold prick in the back of his head didn't go away. Michael took out his phone and took a photo, knowing that this might be his only lead. The next day, Michael downloaded the photo to his computer and tried to enlarge the image, but the quality was too low. The man's face remained blurred, but his figure, posture, gestures, all this gnawed at him, like a memory that he could not grasp. He began to think through everyone he knew, Savannah's colleagues, clients, neighbors. But no one came. He felt that the answer was close, but so far it was only a shadow. In order not to go crazy, Michael delved into the investigation. He began checking the bank statements he had access to through their joint account. He was looking for something unusual, strange expenses, cash withdrawals that Savannah couldn't explain, and I found it. For the past 3 months, there had been regular payments to the Sea Breeze Motel, the same one where he had seen her yesterday. The payments were small, paid from her personal card, which Michael knew about but rarely checked. This was not her style. Savannah liked luxury, not roadside motels. This means she hid these visits. He also noticed several transfers to an account labeled consultations. The amounts were modest but regular, and the name of the recipient was missing. Michael wrote down the dates and amounts in his notebook, deciding that he would figure out what these consultations were later. His mind worked as if in an operating room, methodically, coldly, isolating facts from the chaos of emotions. Michael began to follow Savannah more often. He used an app to track her phone, another measure he installed through the same dubious service that gave him access to her messages. He hated himself for it, but he couldn't stop. The application showed where she was: office, clients' homes, a coffee shop in the center. But sometimes her location turned out to be in places that she did not mention. The same motel, a bar on the outskirts, even an abandoned beach 20 minutes from the Mayflower. One night, when Savannah said she was going to a bachelorette party with her friends, Michael followed her again. This time she stopped at the Rusty Anchor Bar, a dark establishment with shabby wooden walls and a reputation for meeting those who wanted to remain unnoticed. Michael parked in the alley, his car hidden in shadow. He saw Savannah walk in, her heels clicking on the asphalt and her coat fluttering like a cape. A few minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the bar. A man came out, the same one from the motel, with the same familiar gait. This time, the light of the lantern fell on his face, and Michael froze. It was Tyler Reed, an old friend of his from medical school. Tyler, who was best man at their wedding. Tyler, who had returned to Mayflower 2 years ago after a divorce and was now working as a lawyer at a local firm. Michael felt the blood drain from his face. He watched as Tyler entered the bar, his movements confident, almost brazen. Michael remembered how Tyler had come to dinner with them a few months ago, how he had joked with Savannah, how their eyes had crossed each other a little longer than necessary. Then Michael did not attach any importance to this, but now everything fell into place. Tyler, his friend, the man he trusted. Michael did not enter the bar. He couldn't. His hands were shaking, and a fire was raging in his chest. He returned home, his mind in chaos. He tried to remember everything that connected Tyler and Savannah. Tyler visited their home often, especially after his divorce, when he was looking for support. Savannah helped him with the sale of his old house and found a new one. Michael thought it was just friendship, that she was helping an old friend. But now he saw the truth. Their every conversation, every glance was part of the deception. He opened his laptop and returned to the messages he had received from the service. The work contact now has a face. Michael reread the correspondence, and each word cut deeper. "You know how dangerous this is," Savannah wrote. "He doesn't suspect anything," she answered. Michael realized that he was himself, the fool who believed in their family. He found another folder with photographs. There were not only pictures of Savannah, but also selfies of her with Tyler. In one, they were standing on the beach, her hair blowing in the wind, and Tyler had his arm around her waist. It was the same abandoned beach where the app showed her location. Michael closed his laptop, his breathing ragged. He felt as if he had been gutted. The next day, Michael acted like a robot. He took Ethan to therapy, listened to him talk about his new puzzle, smiled at Chloe when she complained about school. But inside, he was empty. Savannah noticed his silence, but didn't ask what was wrong. She was too busy with her lies, her meetings, her Tyler. At dinner, Chloe felt tense again. She threw down her fork and said, "Seriously, what's wrong with you? You're like a zombie." Savannah laughed, but her laugh was forced. "Chloe, it's okay. Just grown-up stuff." Michael looked at her, his gaze as cold as steel. "Yes," he said quietly, "adult matters." Savannah met his gaze, and her smile faltered for a moment. But she quickly turned away, picking up her phone to check her messages. Michael noticed how her fingers froze, as if she was waiting for something. He knew what, or more accurately, who. That night, Michael lay in the dark, listening to Savannah's breathing. He knew that she was not sleeping, her body was too tense. He thought about Tyler, the way he looked at Savannah, the way his hand touched her back at that dinner. He thought about their years of friendship, how they shared dreams, how Tyler was there when Chloe was born. And now this man has stolen his wife, his life. Michael stood up and went down to the office. He opened his notepad and wrote, "Tyler Reed, lover." The word looked foreign, ugly, but it was true. He didn't know what he would do next, but one thing was clear. He wouldn't let this continue. Savannah and Tyler destroyed his family, and they will pay. Outside the window, the ocean roared, its waves crashing against the shore, as if reflecting Michael's rage. The Mayflower was sleeping, but in the Harris house, the storm was already gaining strength, and she was just the beginning. The Harris house smelled of coffee and freshly cut grass that the gardener had cut that morning. October in the Mayflower was mild, with golden leaves falling on the lawns and a salty wind blowing through the streets. But inside the house, the warmth of autumn could not melt the cold that settled between its inhabitants. Michael kept his rage bottled up, but it seeped out in the little things, in his clenched jaw, in the way he avoided Savannah's gaze, in the long nights spent in the office behind a closed door. He thought he was hiding it, but the children Chloe and Ethan saw more than he could have imagined. Chloe, sitting on the sofa in the living room, scrolled through the feed on her phone, but her thoughts were not about her friends' posts. She noticed how her father had changed. His laughter, once warm and infectious, was now rare, and even then there was something forced about it, like the creaking of a door that had not been oiled for years. He no longer joked with her about her musical tastes or asked her how her day at school was. Instead, he was silent, his eyes often lost in the distance, as if he was solving a problem that he could not voice. Chloe felt like something was wrong, and it scared her more than she was willing to admit. Ethan, the youngest son, sat on the floor at the coffee table, putting together a puzzle of a lighthouse. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, but today he seemed even more withdrawn than usual. Ethan rarely spoke unless asked, but in recent days he had begun to repeat strange phrases that no one in the house said out loud. They burst out of him suddenly, like radio static, and each time they made Chloe flinch. On Saturday morning, Chloe went down to the kitchen where Michael was making coffee. He stood at the stove, his back tense, like that of a man ready to strike. Chloe stopped in the doorway, her sneakers squeaking on the marble floor, and Michael turned around. His face softened for a moment, but his eyes remained empty. "Good morning, Dad," Chloe said, trying to sound casual even though her heart sank. She wanted to add something more, to ask why he looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but the words stuck in her throat. "Morning," Michael answered, pouring coffee into a mug. His voice was smooth, but it lacked the usual warmth. He turned to her, holding the mug in his hands. "Are you at school today or somewhere?" Chloe shrugged as she sat down at the kitchen island. "I have a day off. Maybe I'll go to town with my friends. What are you doing?" Michael took a sip of his coffee, his gaze sliding to the window where the ocean lazily rolled waves. "Work," he answered briefly. "Always work." Chloe frowned. He used to tell her about his operations, about his patience, about how he saved someone's life. Now he spoke as if the words were stones that he did not want to lift. She opened her mouth to ask what was going on, but at that moment Ethan walked into the kitchen, his bare feet slapping the floor. "She won't be back by midnight," Ethan said without looking at them. He sat down on the floor by the island and began to arrange the puzzle pieces he had brought with him. Michael froze, his mug stopping halfway to his mouth. "What did you say, baby?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but there was an alarm in it. Ethan didn't answer, his fingers still sorting the pieces by color. Chloe looked at her father, her eyebrows furrowed. "He just says stuff," she said, trying to diffuse the situation. But her own voice trembled. She knew that Ethan sometimes repeated words he heard, but this phrase sounded too specific, too ominous. Michael put the mug on the table. His movements were slow, as if he was afraid of spooking the moment. "Ethan," he called softly, crouching next to his son. "Where did you hear that?" Ethan looked up, his gaze clear but distant, as if he was looking through his father. "She won't be back by midnight," he repeated, and then returned to his puzzle as if nothing had happened. Chloe felt a chill run down her spine. She looked at Michael, expecting him to explain, to laugh, to say that this was nonsense. But his face was stony, and his eyes were dark, like a stormy sea. He stood up without saying a word and left the kitchen, leaving the coffee to cool on the table. Chloe couldn't shake that moment all day. She went to her room, turned on the music, but even the loud beats did not drown out her thoughts. Father was different, and it wasn't just tiredness. She recalled how he looked at her mother at dinner, how his gaze was sharp, almost accusing. Savannah didn't seem to notice or pretended not to notice. She was the same as always, fidgeting, smiling, checking her phone every 5 minutes. But Chloe could see that her smiles did not reach her eyes, and her laughter sounded as if she was rehearsing a role. That evening, when Savannah announced that she was leaving for a meeting with a client, Chloe caught her father's eye. He sat in the living room with a book, but did not turn the pages. His fingers squeezed the cover as if he wanted to tear it. Savannah kissed Ethan on the forehead, shouted to Chloe not to stay up late, and left, leaving behind a trail of perfume and a slight echo of heels. Chloe waited for her father to say something, but he was silent. Half an hour later, she heard the front door slam. She looked out the window and saw Michael's car leaving the yard. It was strange, he rarely left in the evenings, especially without warning. Chloe felt her stomach drop. She didn't know what was happening, but it felt like the beginning of the end. Michael drove behind Savannah, keeping his distance so that her Lexus would not disappear from view, but also not get into her rearview mirror. He had done this before, but each time it was like a new blow. He knew she wasn't going to see a client. He knew that she would meet Tyler, his old friend, the man who betrayed him just like she did. But knowledge did not bring relief, it only fueled the fire inside. Today, Savannah headed to the Rusty Anchor Bar, the very place where Michael first saw Tyler. He parked in the alley, his fingers gripping the steering wheel as he watched her enter. Her coat fluttered, her gait was confident, almost defiant. A few minutes later, a familiar black SUV pulled up and Tyler got out. His face, illuminated by the dim lantern, was the same as in Michael's memories. Sharp cheekbones, light stubble, a smile that had once seemed friendly but now looked predatory. Michael didn't get out of the car. He couldn't. His mind was screaming to burst into the bar, grab Tyler by the collar, and demand an answer. But he knew that this would not solve anything. He needed more, not just the truth, but a plan. He took out his phone and took a few pictures. Savannah entering the bar, Tyler following her. He didn't know why he needed these photographs, but they were proof, a tangible piece of her lie. Meanwhile, at home, Chloe couldn't sit still. She went down to the living room, where Ethan was still putting together his puzzle. He was focused, his small fingers moving with the precision of a watchmaker. Chloe sat down next to her, trying to distract herself. "Cool lighthouse," she said, pointing to the puzzle. "You're almost done." Ethan didn't answer, but his lips twitched in a hint of a smile. Chloe wanted to say something else, but he suddenly spoke. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "He knows, but doesn't say." Chloe froze, her heart skipping a beat. "Who knows?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" Ethan looked up, his gaze so clear that Chloe felt uneasy. "He knows, but he doesn't say," he repeated, and then returned to the puzzle as if nothing had happened. Chloe felt her hand shake. She didn't know what it meant, but the phrase sounded like a warning. She remembered Ethan talking about midnight, and now it didn't seem like an accident. Ethan had always been special. His mind worked differently, picking up on things that others didn't. Chloe suddenly realized that he might have heard something, a conversation, a fragment of a phrase, something that connected with their parents. She stood up, her thoughts confused. She wanted to call her father, ask where he was, but something told her that he would not answer. Instead, she went up to her room and opened her laptop. Chloe didn't know what she was looking for, but her instincts screamed that she had to do something. She logged into her mother's social media account. She knew the password from the time Savannah asked her to upload photos for work. There was nothing unusual there. Posts about real estate, selfies with clients, photos of Ethan on the beach. But Chloe noticed that her mother often liked the posts of the same person, Tyler Reed, a friend of her father. Chloe knew Tyler. He came to their dinners, joked, and brought Ethan puzzles. She'd always thought he was cool, but now something about his profile, his smile, the way he looked at the camera felt off to her. She scrolled through his page and found a photo from the beach where he was standing next to a woman whose face had been cut off. But Chloe recognized her mother's coat, her ring. It was her. Chloe closed her laptop. Her breathing became heavy. She didn't want to believe it, but the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The father who became a stranger. Mom who always disappears. Ethan repeating strange phrases. And now Tyler, whose name is suddenly at the center of it all. Michael returned home after midnight. Chloe heard the front door creak and looked out into the hallway. He stood in the hall, his coat wet from the rain that had begun, and his face gray as ash. He didn't notice her, went into the office and closed the door. Chloe wanted to knock, ask what was going on, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor. She returned to her room, her heart pounding. She knew something was broken, and it couldn't be fixed. The next day, Savannah acted as if nothing had happened. She made pancakes while humming to the radio and even tried to get Chloe to go shopping with her into town. Chloe refused, her voice harsh, almost harsh. Savannah frowned, but did not insist. Michael spent the whole day in the hospital, and Chloe was glad of that. His silence was heavier than her mother's lies. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the tension was almost palpable. Ethan was arranging the food on his plate as usual, lining up the peas in a perfect row. Chloe picked at her pasta with a fork, her eyes darting between her parents. Savannah was chatting about some client, but her phone was lying next to her, and she kept checking the screen. Michael ate in silence, his movements mechanical, like a robot's. Ethan suddenly raised his head and said, "He looks, but doesn't see." Everyone froze. Savannah laughed. Her laugh was high-pitched, almost hysterical. "Ethan, honey, what are you saying?" she asked, but her voice was shaking. Michael looked at his son, his eyes narrowed. "Where did you hear that?" he asked, his tone calm, but Chloe felt the air in the room thicken. Ethan didn't answer. His fingers went back to the peas. Chloe looked at her father, expecting him to say something else, but he just pursed his lips and went back to eating. Savannah quickly changed the subject, but her hands shook as she poured herself some wine. Chloe couldn't remain silent any longer. After dinner, she waited until her mother went to her room and knocked on her father's office door. Michael opened. His face was tired, but he tried to smile. "What is it, Chloe?" he asked, stepping back to let her in. Chloe walked in, her hands clenched into fists. "Dad, what's going on?" she blurted out. You're not the same as before." "And Mom, she's weird too. And Ethan says things like he knows something we don't know." Michael looked at her, his gaze as heavy as granite. He wanted to lie, to say that everything was fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he sighed and said, "Sometimes adults encounter things that are difficult to explain. But I'll figure it out, Chloe. I promise." Chloe felt tears sting her eyes, but she brushed them away. "It's because of Tyler, right?" she asked quietly. "I saw the photo. Mom is with him." Michael froze, his face turning white as chalk. He didn't expect Chloe to know. He wanted to ask what exactly she saw, but instead he simply nodded. "Don't talk about it, Chloe," he said, his voice hoarse. Not now. Chloe nodded, her throat tightening. She left the office, feeling like the world was collapsing around her. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Their family was no longer the same as before. Michael remained in the office, his hands shaking. Chloe knew. Ethan may have felt something too. Their children, their innocent, fragile children, were dragged into this mud. He opened his desk drawer and took out the photographs he had taken at the bar. Savannah and Tyler, his wife and his friend. He stared at them until the pain turned to cold determination. He didn't know how far he would go, but he wouldn't let it continue. Not for himself, but for Chloe and Ethan. Outside the window, the ocean roared, its waves beating against the shore like a heart ready to burst. The Mayflower slept, but the shadows deepened in the Harris house, and their echoes had already reached the children. The evening in the Mayflower was gray, with low clouds that clung to the horizon, as if hesitant to rain. In the Harris house, the only light was on in the kitchen, where Michael sat at the island, his fingers clutching an empty coffee mug. He did not sleep the second night. His eyes were red, but his gaze was sharp as a scalpel. Today, he decided to end the silence. He could no longer live in this house, where Savannah's every smile was a lie, and her every step a betrayal. He waited for her, knowing that she would return late, as always, with another made-up story. Chloe had gone to her friends, and Ethan was sleeping upstairs, his puzzles neatly stacked on the nightstand. The silence in the house was almost palpable, broken only by the distant roar of the ocean. Michael took his phone out of his pocket and opened the photos he had taken outside the rusty Anchor bar. Savannah and Tyler silhouetted in the dim light of a street lamp. He stared at them until the pain turned to cold determination. Today he will ask, directly, no hints. The door opened at 22:47. Michael heard Savannah kick off her heels in the hallway, her bag plopping onto the floor. She entered the kitchen, her blonde hair was slightly disheveled, and her coat was damp from the sea dampness. She froze when she saw him, and her lips twitched, but she quickly put on a smile. "Are you still awake?" she asked, her voice light, almost playful. She went to the refrigerator and took out a bottle of water. "I thought you were already in bed." "Difficult day?" Michael didn't answer. He looked at her, his face motionless like a mask. Savannah, feeling his gaze, turned around, her hand with the bottle frozen. "What?" she said, her smile becoming tense. "Mike, are you okay?" He stood up slowly, his movements measured, like those of a man who knows what he's doing. He put the phone on the table, screen up, where a photo was open. Her and Tyler, his back turned, their shadows merging in the doorway of the bar. "You tell me," he said, his voice low, without a trace of emotion. "In order?" Savannah looked at the phone, and her face froze for a moment. But she quickly recovered, her eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "What is this?" she asked, putting the bottle on the table. "Were you following me?" Michael didn't look away. His hands lay on the table, fingers clasped, but his knuckles were white. "Answer me, Savannah. Who is he?" She laughed, but the laugh was harsh, like cracked glass. "Mike, are you serious? This is the client. We discussed the deal in a bar because he doesn't like offices. Do you really think that I— What? Am I cheating on you?" Her voice was confident, but Michael saw her fingers tremble as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. He knew her too well. 17 years of marriage had taught him to read her gestures, her pauses, her lies. "Client," he repeated. His tone was even, but there was a ring of steel in it. "And you're discussing deals at the Sea Breeze Motel, in room 12? Or on an abandoned beach where no one goes?" Savannah opened her mouth, but no words came. Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms, her posture becoming defensive. "You were spying on me," she said, her voice growing colder. "That's low, Mike, even for you." "Don't change the subject," he snapped. He opened the messages on his phone, the ones he had received from the service, and turned the screen in her direction. "You know how dangerous it is. Mike doesn't suspect anything. Is this also about the deal?" Savannah looked at the screen, and this time her mask cracked. Her lips pursed, and her gaze became hard as granite. She was silent for several seconds, and this silence was louder than any words. Michael felt his heart clench, but he didn't look away. "Who is he?" he repeated. His voice was quiet, but there was strength in it, like a drawn bowstring. Savannah turned away, her fingers gripping the edge of the tabletop. She looked out the window, where the ocean dissolved into darkness, and her shoulders tensed. Michael waited, his breathing was even, but inside he felt how everything he had built over the years was collapsing. "It's not what you think," she finally said, her voice calm, almost businesslike. "This is a mistake, a moment of weakness." "Error," Michael echoed. He stepped closer, his shadow falling on her. Photos in lace lingerie, meetings at the motel, messages where you write that I don't know anything. Is this a mistake? Savannah turned to him. Her blue eyes were cold, without tears, without regret. She straightened up, her chin raised slightly as if she was preparing for a fight. "Okay," she said, her voice as smooth as the surface of a frozen lake. "Do you want the truth?" "Yes, I had an affair. Several months. It doesn't mean anything. Just a way to cope." Michael felt the air leave his lungs. He was waiting for this. He knew that he would hear, but the words still cut like a knife. He clenched his fists, but his face remained motionless. "Cope with?" he asked again. "With what? With our family? With me? With children?" Savannah looked at him, and there was no warmth in her gaze. She was like a stranger, a woman he had never known. "Have a good life, Mike," she said. "You won't understand this. You've always been perfect. Surgeon, savior, father of the year. What about me? I was drowning. Work, Ethan, Chloe, this damn town where everyone expects me to be the perfect wife. I needed something for myself." Michael looked at her, his mind trying to comprehend her words. He wanted to scream, to ask how she could justify betrayal, but instead he asked, "Who is he?" Savannah was silent, her lips pursed. She turned away, her fingers finding the tabletop again, as if she needed something to hold on to. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "It's over, or it will end. I'll figure it out." Michael stepped closer, his voice became quieter, but there was a threat in it. "Tyler," he said, and the name hung in the air like a shot. "This is Tyler, right?" Savannah flinched, her eyes widened for a split second, but she quickly pulled herself together. She didn't deny, didn't lie. Instead, she nodded, her movement abrupt, almost mechanical. "Yes," she said. "Tyler, so what now? Do you want to fight? Divorce? Destroy everything we have?" Michael looked at her, and at that moment he realized that he did not know this woman. She stood in front of him, cold, calculating, without a drop of remorse. He expected tears, screams, apologies, but instead he got this cold truth, and it was worse than anything he could have imagined. "You've already destroyed it," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "You and Tyler. You did this together." Savannah looked at him, her lips trembled, but she did not cry. She simply nodded as if she accepted his words as fact. "Then decide, Mike," she said. "What's next? Because I won't beg." He looked at her, his mind as empty as scorched earth. He wanted to say that he would get a divorce, that he would throw her out of their life, but the words stuck. Instead, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing alone. The door to his office slammed, and the sound echoed throughout the house. Savannah remained in the kitchen, her fingers still gripping the countertop. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, didn't feel anything except a strange emptiness. She knew this moment would come, but she didn't expect it to be so. Cold. She thought Michael would scream, and she would burst into tears, but instead they spoke like strangers, like lawyers discussing the terms of a deal. She picked up her phone and opened her messages, but didn't text Tyler. She knew she had to stop this, but the thought of being alone scared her more than Michael's anger. She closed her eyes, her breathing was even, but her heart was pounding like a caught bird. Upstairs in her room, Chloe was awake. She heard the muffled voices of her parents, their sharp, abrupt phrases. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone said it all. She was curled up on the bed, her headphones lying nearby, but no music playing. She wanted to go down and intervene, but fear kept her in place. She knew their family was falling apart, and there was nothing she could do. Ethan was sleeping, his breathing was quiet, but even in his sleep his fingers moved, as if piecing together an invisible puzzle. He did not hear the conversation, but his mind, sensitive to invisible waves, sensed the rift. Tomorrow he'll say something strange again, and Chloe will wonder where he got it from. Michael sat in his office, his hands on the table and photographs in front of him. He looked at them, but did not see. His mind was occupied with one question: what now? He knew the truth, but it did not bring relief. She only made his world colder, darker, emptier. He thought about Chloe, about Ethan, about how their lives would change if he left. He thought about Tyler, about the way his friend looked at him, knowing that he was sleeping with his wife. And he thought about Savannah, about the woman who chose to lie instead of him. Outside the window, the ocean roared, its waves crashing against the shore like the anger Michael was holding back. The Mayflower slept, but in the Harris house the night was long, and its shadows promised only pain. Autumn rain pattered on the roofs of the Mayflower, turning the cobblestone streets into mirrors reflecting dim street lights. Michael Harris stood in his office, looking at his phone, where the last message from Tyler was glowing. "See you on the yacht on Saturday? Let's talk about old times." This was the invitation Michael had been waiting for. 3 days had passed since his cold confrontation with Savannah, and her tearless confession only fueled his anger. Now he wanted to look into the eyes of Tyler, the man who was his friend, but became a traitor. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted Tyler to feel the weight of his guilt. Michael did not immediately respond to a message. He knew that Tyler liked to play his games, casual smiles, light jokes, as if nothing had changed. But Michael was ready to turn the board over. He wrote a short message: "I'll be there, 18 o'clock." Tyler's yacht, moored at the Mayflower's private marina, was the perfect place for conversation. Isolated, quiet, without witnesses. Michael wasn't planning on a fight. He was a surgeon, not a boxer, but he was going to push Tyler into a corner where he would have nowhere to run. On Saturday afternoon, Michael told Savannah he was going to the hospital for an unscheduled consultation. She nodded, not looking up from the phone, her face unreadable, as if their conversation 3 days ago had never happened. Chloe was in her room, lost in music, and Ethan sat at the puzzle, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Michael kissed the top of his son's head, trying not to think about how this meeting could change their lives. He took the keys and left, his heart pounding, but his mind as cold as steel. Before leaving, he checked his backpack, a voice recorder charged and hidden in his side pocket, photos of Savannah and Tyler from the day before, and a bottle of water to calm his nerves. He didn't know how far he would go, but he wanted to be ready. The recorder was his insurance. If Tyler said something that could be used, Michael would keep it. He wasn't thinking about going to court or getting a divorce, but the evidence gave him a sense of control that he had lost. The road to the marina took 20 minutes. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, saturated with salt and dampness. Tyler's yacht, the Sea Wolf, lay white at the end of the dock, its hull rocking on the lazy waves. Michael parked in the shadow of the warehouse so that his car would not be conspicuous. He put on a dark jacket, pulled up his hood, and walked towards the yacht. His steps were measured, like the rhythm of a metronome. Tyler was waiting for him on the deck, sitting in a lounge chair with a bottle of beer in his hand. His dark hair was tousled by the wind, and his shirt was unbuttoned at the top button, as if he were starring in a resort commercial. He smiled when he saw Michael and raised his bottle in greeting. "Mike, how many years, buddy?" he said. His voice was warm, but there was a hint of wariness in his eyes. "Get up, let's drink to old times." Michael didn't smile. He climbed onto the deck, his movements slow but firm. He stopped 3 steps from Tyler. His hands remained in his pockets, but his fingers clenched the recorder, turning on the recording. "That's not what I came for," Michael said. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but there was a threat in it. Tyler narrowed his eyes, his smile thinning. He put the beer on the table and leaned back in the lounge chair, crossing his arms. "Well, then why?" he asked. His tone was light, but there was a sense of mockery in it. Don't tell me you're still angry about that football argument. I told you the Patriots would screw it up. Michael looked at him, his gaze as cold as the winter ocean. He took the photographs out of his pocket and threw them on the table. Pictures scattered, Savannah entering the bar, Tyler following her, then silhouetted on the beach. Tyler's face didn't change, but his eyes narrowed, and he slowly straightened up. "What is this?" he asked, although it was clear that he knew. "You slept with my wife," Michael said, his voice level, but every word falling like a stone. "Months, maybe years, and you thought that I wouldn't find out?" Tyler looked at the photos, then at Michael. He didn't look away, didn't blush, didn't try to justify himself. Instead, he grinned, his lips curling into a crooked smile. "Well, congratulations, Sherlock," he said, his tone caustic. "You caught us. So what now? Do you want to hit me, or just cry?" Michael felt the blood rush to his temples, but he did not move. He'd been expecting it, the impudence, the arrogance, and yet Tyler's words cut deeper than he expected. "Why?" Michael asked, his voice wavered, but he quickly pulled himself together. "You were my friend. We've been through everything together. Why did you do this?" Tyler stood up, his movements lazy, almost theatrical. He walked up to the yacht's railing, looking out at the water, his back relaxed, as if the conversation was about the weather. "Because she wanted it, Mike," he said without turning around. "Savannah was like a bird in a cage. Your ideal life, your home, your children, it all suffocated her. I just opened her eyes, showed that she could be someone else." Michael clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He wanted to rush at Tyler, but instead he stepped closer. His voice became quieter, but there was anger in it. "Did you open her eyes?" he asked again. "You stole my wife, my family, and you call that help. You're pathetic." Tyler turned around, his eyes sparkling, but he didn't lose his composure. He crossed his arms, his smile growing wider, almost predatory. "Pathetic?" he said. "Look at you, Mike. You're so busy saving other people's lives that you didn't notice how your own was falling apart. Savannah came to me because you haven't seen her. You were too busy with your hospital, your kids, your damn ego. I gave her what she wanted. And guess what? She has no regrets." Michael felt his control cracking at the seams. He took a step forward, his face inches from Tyler, but Tyler didn't back down. They stood looking at each other like two animals about to fight. "Do you think this is a game?" Michael said, his voice hoarse. "You destroyed my family. Chloe knows. Ethan. He feels it. Do you even understand what you've done?" Tyler shrugged, his face unreadable. "Chloe will grow up, Ethan will cope," he said. "And you will find another. You were always good at this, picking up the pieces and pretending everything was okay." Michael grabbed Tyler by the collar, his fingers tightening on the fabric, but he stopped. He wanted to hit, but something in Tyler's eyes, not fear, not guilt, but cold indifference, stopped him. He let go, stepping back, his breathing heavy. "You're not human," Michael said, his voice quiet but full of disgust. "You're a mistake." Tyler straightened his shirt, his smile returning, but now it was harder. "Maybe I'm a mistake," he said, "but Savannah chose me. Think about it, Mike. Think about why." Michael turned and walked towards the ramp, his steps heavy, as if he was carrying the whole world on his shoulders. He didn't look back, didn't say another word. The recorder in his pocket was still recording, but it didn't matter anymore. Tyler didn't repent, didn't ask for forgiveness, and it was worse than any lie. Michael drove home, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his joints hurt. The rain began again, drops hitting the windshield, blurring the lights of the Mayflower. He thought about Tyler's words, how he talked about Savannah as if she were a prize he had won. He thought about Chloe, about Ethan, about how their lives were now torn apart. And he thought about himself, about how he did not notice how his world was collapsing. When he entered the house, Savannah was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. She looked at him, her eyes cold, just like the night she confessed. She didn't ask where he was, but her look said she knew. "You talked to him," she said, her voice level, without question. Michael stopped, his jacket dripping onto the floor. He looked at her, and at that moment he realized that he no longer loved her. There was nothing left, no pain, no anger, just emptiness. "Yes," he said, "and he doesn't regret it." Savannah nodded, her lips pursing. She took a sip of wine, her movements slow, almost ritualistic. "And you?" she asked. "What will you do now?" Michael didn't answer. He walked past her, went up to the office, and closed the door. He took out a voice recorder, connected it to the computer, and saved the recording. He didn't know why, but it was the only thing he could control. Chloe, lying in her room, heard her father return. She was awake, her headphones were on, but no music was playing. She thought about what she saw on social media, about Ethan's words, about how her family was falling apart. She wanted to talk to her father, but fear kept her in place. She knew that the truth had already come out, and now everything would change. Ethan was asleep, his puzzle left unfinished. In his sleep, he whispered something, but the words were unintelligible, like the echo of a distant storm. In the morning, he'll say something new and Chloe will wonder where he got it from. Outside the window, the ocean roared, its waves crashing against the rocks like anger that Michael could no longer contain. The Mayflower slept, but in the Harris house, the shadows deepened, and their edges became sharper. The Mayflower was buried in a cold November fog, its streets glistened with dampness, and its houses seemed like ghosts hidden behind a veil. In the Harris house, the air was saturated with something heavy, almost tangible, like the smell of old wood before a fire. A month has passed since Michael ran into Tyler on the yacht, a month since the truth about Savannah's betrayal became not just his personal pain, but a poison that poisoned the entire family. Chloe and Ethan, their children, found themselves in the midst of this silent hell, where words were not spoken, but their absence cut deeper than any scream. The kitchen, once the heart of the home, was now a place where no one lingered. Chloe was sitting at the table, her headphones lying next to her, and an untouched bowl of cereal in front of her. Her dark hair fell over her face, hiding her eyes, but her pursed lips betrayed the storm within. She hated her mother. This feeling grew gradually, like mold in a damp corner, but now it was all-consuming. Every glance of Savannah, every attempt to speak, every ringing laugh of hers on the phone, all this was proof for Chloe of her lies. Chloe knew about Tyler, knew that her mother had destroyed their family, and this truth burned her like a hot coal. Ethan, sitting on the floor in the living room, was putting together a puzzle, a new one, with a picture of the starry sky. His movements were slower than before, his fingers trembled, and his eyes were more often lost in the void. He barely spoke, even when Michael or Chloe tried to stir him up. His anxiety, always present due to autism, now became a wall separating him from the world. He stopped repeating strange phrases, but his silence was even more frightening. Sometimes he would freeze, looking out the window, as if he was waiting for the ocean to speak to him. Michael watched the children from afar. His heart was breaking, but he did not know how to protect them. He was a shadow of himself. A surgeon accustomed to saving lives could not save his family. After the conversation with Tyler and Savannah's confession, he became withdrawn, his words became rare, and his actions became mechanical. He went to work, returned home, cooked dinner, but it was all like a play where he played the role of a father, a husband, a man. He was empty inside, and this emptiness frightened him more than anger. Savannah, on the other hand, seemed impenetrable. She continued to work, meet with clients, and smile as if nothing had changed. But her eyes, once bright, were now dull, and her movements were sharp, like those of a person who is afraid to stop. She knew that Chloe was avoiding her, that Ethan was moving away, that Michael was looking at her as if she were a stranger. But she didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to explain herself. She simply lived as if she could ride out the storm. Chloe sat in her room, her laptop open to Tyler's social media page. She scrolled through his posts, her fingers trembling with rage. He posted photos from the yacht with a glass of whiskey, with the sunset over the ocean, as if he had the right to happiness after what he had done. Chloe wanted to write to him, to pour out everything that was boiling inside, but she stopped every time. What could she say? "You destroyed my family?" He would just laugh, like he laughed at her father. She heard the front door slam as her mother returned. Chloe closed her laptop and put on her headphones, turning up the music so loud that the bass drowned out Savannah's footsteps. She didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear her voice, her excuses. But Savannah knocked on the door, her voice breaking through the noise. "Chloe, can I come in?" she asked. Her tone was soft, but Chloe could hear the falseness in it. Chloe didn't answer. She curled up on the bed, her hands clutching the pillow. Savannah knocked again, then opened the door. Chloe took off her headphones, her gaze sharp as a knife. "What do you want?" she asked. Her voice was cold, almost alien. Savannah stood in the doorway, her coat still on her shoulders and her bag hanging over her elbow. She tried to smile, but the smile came out crooked. "I just wanted to talk," she said. You hardly talk to me." Chloe snorted, her eyes narrowing. "What should we talk about? About you sleeping with Tyler? Or how are you lying to all of us?" Savannah froze, her face turning pale, but she quickly pulled herself together. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Chloe, you don't understand," she began. Her voice was even, but there was a hint of fatigue in it. "It's not that simple. Adults sometimes make mistakes." "Mistakes?" Chloe interrupted, jumping out of bed. "You call this a mistake? You ruined everything. Dad doesn't sleep, Ethan doesn't speak at all, and you just walk around and pretend that everything is fine." Savannah looked at her, her lips pursed. She wanted to answer, but Chloe didn't give her a chance. "I hate you," she said, her voice trembling, but her eyes were dry. "You are not a mother. You're just selfish." Savannah opened her mouth, but no words came. She stood, her hands dropped, and her gaze became empty. Chloe expected her to scream, to cry, but Savannah simply nodded, as if accepting the verdict. "Okay," she said quietly. "If so, I won't force you." She turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the stairs. Chloe fell onto the bed, her chest constricting, but the tears did not come. She hated her mother, but she hated herself even more because she couldn't change anything. Ethan, sitting in his room, did not hear this conversation, but felt it like an animal feels a storm. His puzzle was almost finished, but he couldn't find the last piece. He looked for it under the table, in a drawer on the floor, but the piece had disappeared, and this caused a panic in him that he could not express. His hand shook, his breathing became rapid, and his eyes darted around the room. Michael found him in this state when he went to check before going to bed. He knelt next to his son, his voice soft but tired. "Hey, baby, what happened?" he asked, placing his hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan didn't answer. His fingers continued to search for the non-existent piece. Michael noticed his son shaking, and his heart sank. He knew that Ethan was withdrawing, that his anxiety was growing, but he didn't know how to stop it. He took Ethan's hand, trying to calm him down. "Everything will be fine," he said, although he didn't believe it himself. "We will find this piece, I promise." Ethan looked at him, his eyes wide but empty. "She's leaving," he said suddenly. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "She's leaving, and we'll stay." Michael froze, his throat constricting. He wanted to ask where Ethan got it from, but he couldn't. Instead, he hugged his son. His arms were warm, but he felt cold inside. Ethan didn't hug him back, but he allowed himself to be held, and that was all Michael could get. The next day, Savannah called Michael into the living room. She was sitting on the sofa, her legs were crossed, and a folder with documents lay on her lap. Michael walked in, his face tired, but he held himself straight, like a man ready to strike. "We need to talk," Savannah said, her voice businesslike, almost official. "I filed for divorce." Michael looked at her, his eyes empty. He was waiting for this. He knew that it was inevitable, but he still felt the ground disappearing from under his feet. He sat down opposite, his hands on his knees. "And what do you want?" he asked. His voice was even, but there was a heaviness in it. Savannah opened the folder, her fingers moving quickly, as if she had been rehearsing this moment. "I want a house," she said, "and children. Chloe, of course, will be against it, but she needs time." Ethan. He'll get used to it. I can give them stability. Michael looked at her, his mind trying to comprehend her words. She spoke of children as property, as trophies to be taken. He wanted to scream, to say that she had no right, that she had ruined their lives, but instead he was silent. His silence was his weapon, his shield, his way to survive. Are you serious? He finally said. His voice was quiet, but there was a ring of steel in it. You think you can just take them and leave, after everything? Savannah looked at him, her eyes cold, like the night she confessed to cheating. I'm their mother, Mike, she said, and I won't leave their lives. You can be angry, you can hate me, but it won't change the fact that they need me. Michael clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He wanted to say that she was not needed, that her betrayal poisoned everything, but he saw Chloe, her anger, and Ethan, his silence. He knew that the children would not choose him, not now, not after everything they had been through, and it was worse than any pain. Okay, he said, his voice hoarse but firm. Take the house. Take the children. Bye. Savannah looked at him, her eyebrows raised slightly, as if she didn't expect him to give in so easily. But she didn't argue. She closed the folder, her movements were sharp, almost triumphant. I'm glad we agreed, she said. It will be better for everyone. Michael didn't answer. He stood up and walked out of the living room, his steps heavy, as if he was carrying the whole world on his shoulders. He went up to the office, closed the door, and sat down at the table. His hands shook, but he did not cry. He simply looked out the window, where the ocean dissolved into fog, and thought about what he had lost. Chloe found out about the divorce that evening when Savannah called her into the kitchen. She sat at the table, her hands folded, like a teacher ready to announce grades. Your father and I have decided to separate, Savannah said, her voice calm, almost businesslike. You and Ethan will stay with me. It will be better for you. Chloe looked at her, her eyes filled with hatred. Better, she said, her voice shaking with rage. You ruined everything, and now you want me to live with you? I'd rather go to my dad. Savannah sighed, her face remaining expressionless. Chloe, you don't understand, she said. You are still a child. You need time to accept this. Chloe jumped up, her chair moving away with a clatter. I'm not a child, she shouted. I know what you did, and I will never forgive you. She ran out of the kitchen, her steps thundering down the stairs. Savannah remained seated, her fingers gripping the edge of the table, but she did not follow her. She knew Chloe wouldn't listen, not now, but she was sure that time would fix everything. She was always sure of this. Ethan didn't hear this conversation, but he could feel the house getting colder. He sat in his room, his puzzle abandoned, and his eyes staring into emptiness. He didn't speak, didn't cry, but his anxiety grew like a shadow that absorbed the light. Michael came to see him before bed, his voice soft but empty. Everything will be fine, baby, he said, sitting down next to her. I will always be with you. Ethan didn't answer, his fingers fiddling with the edge of the blanket. Michael wanted to hug him, but stopped. He knew Ethan didn't like to be touched when he was sick. Instead, he just sat there, listening to the silence that was louder than any scream. Michael agreed to the divorce, but that was not the end. He knew he wouldn't give up the children without a fight, but right now he was too tired to fight. He moved into a small apartment in the middle of the Mayflower, leaving the house to Savannah. He saw Chloe on weekends, but she was distant, her anger at her mother spreading to him. Ethan visited less frequently, his anxiety making travel difficult. Michael called them every day, but their voices were quiet, like an echo from another world. Savannah lived in a house that now seemed too big. She worked, smiled at clients, but at night she sat in the living room with a glass of wine, looking into the darkness. She knew that Chloe hated her, that Ethan was withdrawing into himself, but she couldn't stop it. She had chosen her path, and now she had to walk it alone. The Mayflower woke up under a gray December sky, its streets covered with a thin crust of ice, and its lanterns reflected in the puddles like stars in a freezing sea. In the Harris house, now Savannah's house life flowed in a new way, but its rhythm was alien, like a melody played on an out-of-tune piano. Savannah and Tyler were no longer hiding. They lived together, their cars parked side by side in the driveway, and their laughter echoed through the house that Michael had built with his own hands, his dreams, his love. For Chloe and Ethan, it was not a home, but a cage where every corner reminded of the past and every day of betrayal. Chloe, who turned 17, was hardly ever at home. She stayed with friends, disappeared into the library, or wandered the frozen beaches of the Mayflower, just to avoid seeing her mother and Tyler. Her hatred of Savannah had become as much a part of her as her breathing, but now it was joined by her disgust for Tyler. He tried to be a friend, joked, brought her coffee, but Chloe only saw him as the man who stole her family. She answered him in monosyllables, and more often she simply ignored him. Her gaze was sharp, like broken glass. Ethan, who had recently turned 11, retreated even deeper into himself. His puzzles, once his sanctuary, now lay untouched in boxes. He spent hours staring out the window, his fingers fiddling with the edges of his shirt as his anxiety grew like a shadow on a winter afternoon. Savannah tried to talk to him, took him to see a therapist, but Ethan remained silent, his eyes empty, as if he was seeing a world that no longer existed. Tyler, not understanding him, called it a phase, and this only increased the alienation. Michael lived in a small apartment in the center of Mayflower, his days filled with work at the hospital, but his mind was occupied with other things. He didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't drink to drown out the pain. Instead, he planned. His anger, once hot, now turned ice cold, and he channeled it into one direction: revenge. Not the one that ends with fists or screams, but the one that hits where it hurts most: pride, success, the life that Savannah and Tyler tried to build on the ruins of his family. Savannah and Tyler weren't just dating, they were flaunting their new lives. They appeared together at Mayflower events, charity evenings, gallery openings, yacht club dinners. Tyler, with his charming smile and expensive suit, was in his element, and Savannah, with her flawless makeup and easy laugh, played the role of the ideal companion. They lived in the Harris house, sleeping in the bedroom where Michael and Savannah had once planned their future, and it was like spitting in the face of everything Michael had lost. Chloe saw them together one day when she was coming home from school. They stood in the driveway, Tyler with his arm around Savannah's waist as she laughed, her head thrown back. Chloe stopped, her backpack sliding off her shoulder and her throat tightening. She didn't go home. Instead, she turned around and rode towards her father, her bike creaking under the weight of her anger. Michael opened the door, his face tired, but he hugged her without asking questions. Chloe didn't cry, she had forgotten how to do it a long time ago, but her silence was louder than any scream. Ethan, unlike his sister, could not escape. He was too small, too fragile, and his anxiety made every change painful. Savannah tried to be a mother, cooked him breakfast, took him to classes, but her presence only intensified his alienation. Tyler, not understanding how to communicate with Ethan, kept his distance, and that was even worse. One day, Ethan, sitting at dinner, looked at Tyler and said, "You are not my dad." Savannah froze, her fork stopping midway. Tyler laughed, trying to lighten the mood, but his laugh was forced. "Sure, buddy," he said. "I'm just a friend." Ethan didn't answer. He stood up and went to his room. His steps were quiet but heavy. Savannah looked after him, her lips pursed, but she did not follow him. Tyler shrugged as if it was a small thing, but there was a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Michael, watching this from afar, did not allow himself to drown in pain. He knew that Savannah and Tyler lived in his house. He knew that they were building their family on its ruins. Chloe told him about how Tyler took Ethan to football, how Savannah repainted the living room, how they were planning a vacation. Every word was like a knife, but Michael used that pain as fuel. He decided to strike where Savannah was vulnerable: her business, her reputation, her pride. Savannah was the Mayflower's top realtor, her main street office a showcase of her success. Glass walls, crisp white sofas, photographs of mansions sold. She closed deals with ease, and her clients, rich visitors and local elites, trusted her instincts. But Michael knew this world just as well. His connections at the hospital, at the yacht club, at the city council went deeper than she could have imagined. He was a surgeon who saved the lives of their friends, their relatives, their colleagues, and he decided to use it. Michael invested his savings in a new business, a real estate agency which he called Shoreline. He rented an office right across the street from Savannah's, so close that their signs were almost eye to eye. His office was more modest dark wood, minimalism, but he relied on his reputation. He hired 2 agents, young and hungry, and began poaching Savannah's clients using his connections. The first was Richard Keller, a local real estate developer whose son Michael had operated on 2 years earlier. Richard was loyal to Savannah, but Michael invited him to coffee, reminded him of an old debt, and a week later Keller signed a contract with Shoreline to sell 3 houses. Then there was Margaret Wilson, the widow of a millionaire whose husband Michael saved from a heart attack. She transferred her investment to Michael after one dinner where he talked about reliability and trust. One by one, Savannah's clients began to leave, their loyalty dissolving under the weight of the favors Michael had accumulated over the years. Savannah didn't notice this right away. Her business was strong, but when big deals started falling through, she felt the pressure. She saw the Shoreline sign every day, saw Michael walk into his office, his suit impeccable and his face impenetrable. She knew this was no accident. He didn't just compete, he destroyed it, slowly, methodically, without a word. Chloe smiled for the first time in months when she learned about her father's business. She would come to his office after school, sit in a leather chair and leaf through magazines while he discussed deals. She didn't say it, but Michael saw a spark of pride in her eyes. She knew it was revenge and supported him, although her own pain did not go away. "You'll crush them, Dad," she said one day, her voice quiet but firm. "They deserve it." Michael looked at her, his heart sank. He didn't want Chloe to live in this anger, but he couldn't stop her. He simply nodded, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I'm doing this for us, Chloe," he said. "For you and Ethan." Ethan, however, saw none of this. His world grew smaller every day. He stopped going to therapy, Savannah insisted, but he just sat in the office silently, and the therapist gave up. At school, he became even quieter. His teachers noticed that he did not participate, did not answer, did not make eye contact. Savannah tried to talk to him, but her words bounced off like stones off a wall. Tyler, not knowing how to help, only made things worse with his clumsy attempts. One evening, Ethan, sitting at dinner, looked at Savannah and said, "This is not my home." Savannah froze, her spoon stopping in midair. Tyler, sitting next to him, tried to smile. "Well, buddy, this is your house," he said. "We're all family here." Ethan looked at him. His eyes were empty, but there was a spark of anger in them. "You're not family," he said and stood up, his chair creaking on the floor. He went to his room, leaving Savannah and Tyler in silence. Savannah looked at Tyler, her lips pursed. "You have to try harder," she said, her voice harsh. "He is my son." Tyler shrugged, his face hardening. "I'm not his father, Sav," he said, "and I never will. Maybe you should have thought about this earlier." Savannah didn't answer, but her hands shook. She got up, went into the bedroom, and closed the door. Tyler remained at the table, his beer cooling, and a shadow of doubt flashed in his eyes. Michael didn't stop. He lured away 3 more major clients, including the Donovan family, whose waterfront mansion was the biggest deal of the year. Savannah tried to hold them back, but Michael offered better terms, and the Donovans chose him. Savannah's office began to empty. Her agents were getting nervous, and her smile was becoming more and more forced. One day, she crossed paths with Michael on the street between their offices. He was walking out of Shoreline, his coat flapping in the wind and a briefcase in his hands. She stopped, her eyes narrowed. "Do you think this is funny?" she asked. Her voice was cold, but there was a tremor in it. "Destroy my business." Michael looked at her, his face calm, almost indifferent. "I'm just doing my job, Savannah," he said. "How did you make yours?" She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the asphalt. "This is not a game, Mike," she said. "You're not just harming me. Chloe, Ethan, they suffer too." Michael clenched his jaw, his eyes flashing. "Don't you dare talk about them," he said, his voice quiet but heavy as a blow. You lost your right when you chose Tyler. Savannah opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked at him. Her face was pale and her lips were trembling. Michael turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the cold wind. Chloe, having learned about the conversation from a friend whose mother had seen them on the street, felt strangely satisfied. She hated her mother, but now her hatred extended to Tyler, to their new life, to the house that was no longer hers. She began spending more time with Michael, helping him with papers and answering calls. It gave her purpose, something to take her mind off the pain. Ethan, locked in his own world, did not know about his father's revenge. But he felt the house becoming alien. He stopped sleeping at night. His anxiety manifested itself in new rituals. He counted steps from bed to door, checked if the window was closed, whispered numbers to calm down. Savannah saw this, but didn't know how to help. Tyler, tired of her reproaches, began to spend more time outside the home, and their family was bursting at the seams. Michael watched all this from afar. His revenge was cold but precise. He didn't want to destroy Savannah completely, not for her sake, but for the sake of the children. But he wanted her to feel what she had lost, to make Tyler realize that his victory was an illusion. He continued to build Shoreline, his business grew and his reputation strengthened. But every evening, when he returned to the empty apartment, he looked at the photo of Chloe and Ethan and wondered if it was worth it. Outside the window, the ocean roared. Its waves beat against the shore like a heart that knew no peace. The Mayflower slept, but in its shadow the war was flaring up, and its outcome was still unclear. Michael began his investigation by accident. One of his new clients, a lawyer named Glenn Marshall, mentioned in a conversation that Tyler, who worked as an attorney at the prestigious firm Crowe and Associates, was involved in some not-so-clean deals. Glenn didn't go into detail, but his hint lit a spark. Michael, whose Mayflower connections ran deep, decided to check it out. He didn't want to rely on rumors, he needed facts. He hired a private investigator recommended by a hospital colleague. The detective, an elderly man named Frank with a face that looked like he was carved from oak, specialized in financial fraud. Michael told him everything he knew about Tyler, his position, clients, habits. He didn't tell Frank his personal motives, but his tone said enough. Frank nodded, no questions asked, and promised results in a month. While the detective was working, Michael continued to put pressure on Savannah's business. He lured away two more of her key clients, including the owner of a restaurant chain who was planning to buy land for a new project. Savannah, whose office now looked deserted, began to lose agents too quick, unable to cope with the instability. She tried to fight, reduced commissions, called old clients, but Michael was always one step ahead. His reputation as a surgeon who saved hundreds of lives worked better than any advertising. Chloe, seeing her father's success, began to come to him more often. She helped sort documents, answered calls, and there was a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been there for months. One day, sitting in the office, she asked, "Dad, you won't stop, right? They must pay." Michael looked at her, his face tired but determined. "They're already paying Chloe," he said. But this is not the end. Ethan, meanwhile, went deeper and deeper into his world. His anxiety manifested itself in new habits. He counted tiles in the kitchen, rearranged books in a strictly defined order, and refused to leave the room if the door was open. Savannah, absorbed in her problems, did not notice how he was moving away. Tyler, whom Ethan openly ignored, stopped trying to establish contact, and this only worsened the rift. 3 weeks later, Frank sent Michael a report. It came in a sealed envelope, delivered by courier to his apartment. Michael opened it late at night, when the city was asleep and the sound of the ocean was the only sound. Inside were documents, emails, bank statements, and conversation records that Frank obtained through his sources. The report was like a mine ready to explode. Tyler, it turns out, had been running the scam at Crowe and Associates for years. He manipulated clients' accounts by transferring small amounts to fictitious accounts, which he then transferred through offshore companies. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to accumulate a decent amount of capital. He also falsified documents to hide losses in deals he was responsible for and took kickbacks from contractors whose services he promoted. All this was done wisely, but carelessly Tyler relied on his reputation and connections, not expecting anyone to start digging. Michael reread the report 3 times, his fingers trembling, not from anger, but from a strange satisfaction. This was what he was looking for, not just a way to hit Tyler, but to destroy him. He knew that exposing such machinations would not only cost Tyler his job, but also undermine his position in the Mayflower, where reputation was currency. He contacted Frank and asked that a copy of the report be passed anonymously to Crow and Associates. Frank, accustomed to such requests, completed the task in 2 days, sending the documents to the firm's managing partner with a note, "Check your finances." Michael also sent an anonymous letter to the local newspaper, the Mayflower Post, with excerpts from the report, hinting that they had a chance for a big story. He did not sign, but knew that journalists would not miss such a story. The consequences came quickly. A week later, Crow and partners announced an internal investigation. Tyler was suspended from work, his office was sealed, and clients began calling with questions. The Mayflower, a small town where gossip spread faster than the wind, began to buzz. The Mayflower Post published an article entitled "Lawyer Under Suspicion: Financial Fraud Among the City's Elite," without naming Tyler directly, but giving plenty of hints. His name was on everyone's lips, in the yacht club, in coffee shops, at charity events. Tyler tried to keep his face up. He appeared in the city, his smile was still in place, but his eyes betrayed tension. He told his friends that it was a misunderstanding and that he would sort it out, but his confidence was dwindling every day. Savannah, whose business was already bursting at the seams, felt the ground disappear from under her feet. She knew Tyler was in trouble, but she had no idea that Michael was behind it. She tried to support him, but her own problems, leaving clients, an empty office, the silence of her children made it almost impossible. Chloe learned about the scandal from social networks. She was sitting in a cafe with a friend when she saw a post about Tyler. Her lips curved into a smile, but she didn't say a word. Later, she came to Michael, her eyes sparkling. "It's you, right?" she asked, her voice quiet but full of admiration. "You got him." Michael looked at her, his face serious. "I just gave people the truth, Chloe," he said. "They did the rest themselves." Ethan, as always, was on the sidelines of these events, but even he felt the changes. Tyler, who was now rarely at home, stopped trying to talk to him, and this brought Ethan a strange relief. He began putting puzzles together again, but his movements were slow and his anxiety still had a grip on him. Savannah, seeing this, felt guilty, but her energy was spent on saving Tyler and her business. 2 weeks later, Crow and partners announced Tyler's dismissal. The investigation confirmed the fraud, and although a criminal case has not yet been opened, his reputation was destroyed. His clients abandoned him, his friends stopped calling, and the yacht club revoked his membership. Tyler, a man who lived by his charm, turned out to be nothing without it. He started drinking more often. His car was now parked outside the rusty Anchor Bar until midnight, and his smile disappeared. Savannah, whose business was on the verge of collapse, began to quarrel with Tyler. Their screams were heard even by Chloe, who locked herself in her room, turning on the music at full volume. One night Ethan, sitting in his room, said quietly, "He will leave." Chloe, hearing this, looked at her brother, her heart sank. She didn't ask how he knew, but she believed him. Ethan always felt more than he said. Michael, upon learning of Tyler's dismissal, did not celebrate. He sat in his office, looking at the ocean outside the window, and thought that this was not the end. He destroyed Tyler, but Savannah still held on, and Chloe and Ethan still suffered. His revenge was cold, but it did not fill the emptiness inside. He took the photo of the children out of his desk drawer and stared at it for a long time, his fingers gripping the frame. Savannah stood in her office and looked at the shoreline sign across the street. She knew Michael was behind it and knew he wouldn't stop. Her business was dying, her new life with Tyler was falling apart, and her children were further away than ever. She wasn't crying, but her hands were shaking as she dialed the number of the next client who most likely wouldn't answer. Outside the window, the ocean roared, its waves crashing against the shore, like anger that still smoldered in our hearts. The Mayflower lived its own life, but in its shadows, those who considered themselves invincible fell, and their collapse was only the beginning. Chloe, now 17, couldn't take it anymore. Every day in the house was like a test. Seeing Tyler lounging on the couch with a bottle of beer, hearing his mother's fake voice pretending that everything was fine, living in rooms where memories of the past echoed. Her hatred for Savannah, which began a year ago, was now not just a feeling, it had become a part of her personality, like a scar that would never heal. Chloe decided to leave. Don't just leave, run away, cut off all ties with your mother, with this house, with this lie. Ethan, a 12-year-old boy whose anxiety turned him into a ghost, rarely left his room. His puzzles, which had once saved him from the chaos of the world, were now assembled slowly, with long pauses when he simply stared into space. He didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't react to Savannah or Tyler's attempts to reach him. But in his silence there was something new, something brewing, like a storm that gathers for years. Michael, living in his own apartment and running Shoreline, has become a beacon for Chloe and a shadow for Ethan. His revenge against Savannah and Tyler reached its climax. He not only destroyed their business and reputation, but also became a symbol of stability for those who turned their backs on them. However, his victory was bitter. Every night he looked at photographs of the children, wondering if he had paid too high a price. Chloe came to him more and more often, but Ethan remained with his mother, and this tore Michael apart. Chloe planned her escape carefully. She knew that Savannah would not let her go just like that, not out of love, but out of pride, out of a desire to maintain the appearance of a family. Chloe was waiting for the right moment. It came on Friday, when Savannah had left for a meeting with her lawyer and Tyler was at the bar, as usual. Chloe packed a backpack, several sets of clothes, a laptop, headphones, an old diary that she kept before the divorce. She didn't take anything to remind her of her mother, no gifts, no photographs, not even the favorite sweater Savannah had bought her last Christmas. Before leaving, she sat down at the kitchen table and picked up a piece of paper and a pen. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from determination. She wrote a letter. Each word was like a blow, like a way to throw out everything that had been accumulating inside. Mother, I'm leaving. Don't look for me, don't call, don't pretend you care. You destroyed our family, you destroyed Dad, Ethan, me. You chose Tyler, you chose to lie, and now you live in the house that Dad built for us like you have the right to do so. I can no longer look at you, hear your voice, see how you pretend that nothing happened. You are no longer my example. You are not a mother. You're just a woman who broke everything I loved. I won't be back. Never. Chloe. She folded the letter in half and left it on the table, weighing it down with a coffee mug. Then she put on her backpack, took one last look at the house, the living room where she and Ethan watched movies, the kitchen where Dad was making pancakes, and left. The snow crunched under her boots as she walked to the bus stop. She didn't look back. Chloe arrived at Michael's late in the evening. He opened the door, his face was tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. She didn't cry, didn't throw herself into arms, she just walked in, threw off her backpack and said, I can't live there anymore. Michael nodded, his hand resting on her shoulder. He didn't ask and didn't persuade me to return. He simply brought her hot tea and made her bed in the guest room. Chloe lay down on the bed, her body tense, but for the first time in a year, she felt like she could breathe. Savannah found the letter 2 hours later. She returned home, her coat damp from snow, and in her hands a folder with documents from the lawyer who was trying to save the remains of her business. She saw the sheet on the table, her heart sank, but she did not immediately decide to take it. When she read it, her face did not change. She didn't cry or scream. She just sat there, holding the letter, her fingers clenching the paper until it crumpled. Tyler, returning drunk, tried to speak, but she cut him off. Go away. He left, slamming the door, and Savannah remained in the kitchen, staring into space. The letter lay in front of her like a sentence, and for the first time in a year, She felt that she was losing something that could not be returned. Ethan, locked in his room, was unaware of Chloe's escape. He sat on the floor, his fingers fingering the old puzzle, but he didn't put it together. His anxiety was like a shadow that followed him everywhere, but in recent weeks something new had been growing within him, not anger, not fear, but clarity. He heard Savannah and Tyler arguing, saw his mother trying to pretend that everything was okay, and felt the house become alien. And he remembered his father, his voice, his hands, his promises, which now seemed distant. A year has passed since the truth about Savannah's betrayal surfaced. For a year, Ethan barely spoke, his words as rare as stars in the daytime sky. But on this evening, February 16th, 2026, something changed. Savannah walked into his room, her face pale and her eyes empty after Chloe's letter. She sat on the edge of his bed, her voice quiet, almost pleading. "Ethan, honey," she said, "talk to me, please." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked at the puzzle, his fingers frozen. Then he slowly raised his eyes. His gaze was clear, direct, and for the first time in a year, he looked into his mother's eyes. His voice, hoarse from silence, was firm. "You broke Dad." Savannah froze, her breathing stopping. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Ethan didn't look away, his eyes, usually empty, now filled with pain that he couldn't express before. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken in a year, and it cut like a knife. "Ethan," Savannah began, her voice trembling, but he interrupted her, his words slow but heavy. "You broke it. And us." He turned away, his fingers starting to move through the puzzle again, but his shoulders were shaking. Savannah sat, her hands clenched into fists, but she did not cry. She stood up, her steps unsteady, and walked out, closing the door. In the corridor, she leaned against the wall. Her breathing was ragged, but the tears did not come. She knew Ethan was right, but she couldn't admit it. Michael found out about Ethan's words the next day when Chloe told him over the phone. She called her brother to check on him, and Ethan, for the first time in a long time, spoke to her, his voice quiet but clear. Chloe cried as she told her father. Her words were jumbled, but Michael understood everything. He sat in his office, looking at the Savannah sign across the street, and for the first time in a year, he felt that his revenge might not have been in vain. Ethan spoke. Chloe was with him. It was not a victory, but a step towards something that could be healing. He didn't know what would happen next. Savannah still had a hold on Ethan, but her hold was weakening. Tyler, having lost his job and respect, was on the verge of leaving. His suitcases were already in the hallway. Michael continued to build Shoreline and his business flourished, but his heart was with his children. He knew that Ethan would probably come to him soon, like Chloe, and he would be ready. Savannah, standing in the empty living room, looked at Chloe's letter, which was still lying on the table. She hadn't touched him since that night, but his words burned in her memory. She knew that Ethan was leaving, that Tyler would not stay, that her life, which she had tried so desperately to build, was falling apart. She didn't cry, but her hands shook as she poured herself some wine, her gaze lost. Outside the window, the ocean roared, its waves beating against the shore, like a heart that was still struggling. The Mayflower slept, but its shadows were full of voices, and one of them, Ethan's, finally broke through the silence. March in the Mayflower was damp and chilly, with the wind carrying the smell of salt and earth. The cemetery on the hill, surrounded by old oak trees, seemed cut off from the world. Its stone slabs glistened from the recent rain, and the silence was so thick that it drowned out even the distant roar of the ocean. Michael stood by the fresh grave. His coat was wet, but he didn't notice. His mother, Elizabeth Harris, died 3 days ago, a heart attack, sudden and merciless, like a lightning strike. She was 72, and although her health was failing, no one expected her to leave so soon. Michael looked at the tombstone, simple, with a name and dates engraved on it. His face was motionless, but his eyes betrayed the storm within. Elizabeth was his rock, the woman who taught him to hold his head high even when the world was falling apart. She knew about the divorce, about Savannah's betrayal, about his revenge, but she never condemned him. "Do what you have to do, but don't lose yourself," she had said once, and those words now echoed in his head. He had lost her, and it was another wound he didn't know how to heal. Chloe stood nearby, her black coat too big and her hair stuck to her face from the dampness. She held Michael's hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. Her escape to her father 3 weeks ago had marked the final break with Savannah, and now she was living with Michael, her room in his apartment littered with boxes she had not yet unpacked. Chloe wasn't crying, her tears had long since dried, but her eyes were red and her lips were pursed. She loved her grandmother, her warm hugs, her stories about Michael's youth. Now that too has been taken away. Ethan was with them, but kept a little to the side, his boots sinking into the wet grass. His anxiety still had a grip on him, but the words he'd spoken to Savannah a month ago, "You broke Daddy," seemed to unlock something within him. He began to speak a little more in short phrases, but his gaze was distant, as if he saw more than he could express. Today he was silent, his hands fiddled with the hem of his jacket, and his eyes were fixed on the grave. The funeral took place in the morning, modest, as Elizabeth wanted. Michael's colleagues, several family friends, and neighbors came. Savannah wasn't invited. Michael didn't want to see her, and Chloe outright said she wouldn't let her. But rumors spread quickly in the Mayflower, and Savannah learned of Elizabeth's death from a friend. She decided to come to the cemetery, not for the service, but later, when the crowd had dispersed. She wanted to pay her respects, but perhaps deep down she was hoping for something else, for forgiveness, for a chance to talk. The cemetery was almost empty when Savannah showed up. Her car, now not a white Lexus, but a modest sedan, stopped at the gate. She came out, her black dress was formal, and her hair was pulled back into a tight bun. She carried a bouquet of white lilies. Her steps were slow but decisive. Michael noticed her first, his body tensed, but he didn't move. He knew she would come. Savannah always liked to make gestures, even when they were inappropriate. Chloe, standing closer to the path, saw her mother next. Her face changed, her eyes narrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She let go of Michael's hand and stepped forward, her boots squelching in the mud. Savannah stopped 10 steps away, her gaze darting from Chloe to Michael to Ethan, who was still looking at the grave. I I came to say goodbye," Savannah said, her voice quiet but firm. She held up the bouquet as if it could explain her presence. Elizabeth deserved it. Chloe stepped closer, her hands clenched into fists. Her voice, when she spoke, was cold, like the wind blowing between the graves. "Go away," she said, her words sharp but not loud. "You don't belong here." Savannah looked at her, her eyes fluttered, but she didn't back down. "Chloe, I don't want to fight," she said, her tone almost pleading. "I just want." "You don't want anything," Chloe interrupted, her voice becoming louder, but not breaking. "You destroyed everything. Grandma died, and you. You dare to come here as if you have something to say?" Michael stepped forward, his hand laying on Chloe's shoulder, but he didn't stop her. His gaze was fixed on Savannah, and there was no warmth or anger in it, only weariness. He didn't want this scene, not here, not over his mother's grave, but he knew Chloe wouldn't back down, and he had no intention of holding her back. Savannah took a step closer, her bouquet lowered and her face paler. "I lost her too, Chloe," she said, her voice trembling, but there were no tears. "She was part of my life. I have the right." "Right?" Chloe almost laughed, but her laughter was bitter, like poison. "You have no rights. You betrayed us, betrayed Dad, betrayed everything that Grandma valued. Leave, or I'll make you." Ethan, hearing his sister's voice, raised his head. His eyes, usually empty, were now clear as he looked at Savannah. He didn't say anything, but his gaze was heavy, like an accusation. Savannah met his eyes, and for a moment her resolve wavered. She remembered his words, "You broke Daddy," and felt them cutting her again. "Chloe, please," she began, but Chloe stepped even closer, her face inches from her mother. "I said go away," she repeated, her voice low, almost a growl. "Or I'll scream so that the whole city will know what you are like." Savannah froze, her fingers squeezing the stems of the lilies, and several petals fell to the wet ground. She looked at Michael for support, but his face was stony. He didn't say a word, but his silence was louder than any order. Savannah looked at Ethan, then back at Chloe, and realized she had lost. There was no turning back, there was no forgiveness, there was no chance. She backed away slowly, her heels sinking into the mud. She stopped at the gate, her bouquet was still in her hands, but she did not put it on the grave. She threw him to the ground, her movement was sharp, almost violent, and walked away without looking back. Her car started, the headlights flashed in the darkness, and she disappeared over the hill. Chloe stood there, her chest heaving, but she didn't cry. She turned to Michael, her eyes dry but full of pain. She had no right, she said, her voice quieter but still firm. Not here. Michael nodded, his hand squeezing her shoulder. You did what you had to do, he said, his voice hoarse but warm. I'm proud of you. Ethan came closer, his steps unsteady. He looked at the grave, then at Chloe, and said, his voice quiet but clear, she shouldn't have come. It was another complete sentence, the second in a year, and it hung in the air like a bell. Chloe looked at her brother, her lips twitching into a faint smile. Michael knelt down next to Ethan, his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. You're right, baby, he said. She shouldn't have. They stood at the grave, three against the world, their shadows merging in the gray light. Snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the ground like a shroud. Michael thought about his mother, about her strength, about how she taught him to keep his family together. He looked at Chloe and Ethan and knew that despite everything, they were his family and he wouldn't let anyone take them away again. Savannah returned to the house. Her dress was stained with dirt and her hands were shaking. Tyler was in the living room, his bottle of beer on the table and the TV blaring the news. He looked at her, his eyebrows raised. What's happened? He asked, his voice indifferent. Savannah didn't answer. She walked past, went up to the bedroom and closed the door. She stood at the window, looking out at the ocean that roared in the darkness. She thought about Chloe, about Ethan, about Michael, about Elizabeth. She thought about her choice, about Tyler, about the house that was no longer hers. And for the first time in a year, she felt like her mask was cracking, but the tears never came. Michael, Chloe, and Ethan returned home. Their clothes were wet, but they were together. Chloe turned on the music, Ethan took out the puzzle, and Michael made hot chocolate. They didn't talk about Savannah, they didn't talk about the cemetery, but their silence was warm, like a fire in a fireplace. They were a family, albeit broken, but still alive. Outside the window, the ocean roared, its waves beating against the shore like a heart that refused to give up. The Mayflower slept, but its cemeteries held stories, and one of them, the story of the Harrises, was far from over. For Savannah, life became a desert where every step was a struggle. Her business, once her pride, collapsed under the onslaught of Michael's shoreline. Her home, a symbol of past happiness, was under threat because of the debts that Tyler had accumulated like stones in a backpack. Her children, Chloe and Ethan, had turned their backs on her, and that loneliness was worse than any loss. She stood on the edge, but did not give up, not out of strength, but out of stubbornness, out of unwillingness to admit that her choices led to collapse. Michael, on the other hand, found new determination in himself. His apartment in the middle of Mayflower became home to Chloe, who was now a senior and planning to attend college. Ethan still lived with Savannah, but his visits to his father became more frequent, and his every word, rare but accurate, was like a ray of light for Michael. His business flourished, his reputation grew, but inside he felt empty. Revenge, so sweet at first, did not fill the hole left by the breakup of the family. However, he knew he had to be strong for Chloe, for Ethan, for himself. The child custody trial, scheduled for mid-May, marked a turning point. Michael decided to fight for Ethan, knowing that Savannah could not provide him with stability. He didn't want this trial, he didn't want a new war, but for the sake of his son, he was ready to do anything. Chloe, now an adult, was not eligible for guardianship, but her support was his rock. Ethan, still frail but beginning to speak, was at the center of this battle, and Michael knew he would not lose. Savannah sat in her bedroom, the window was open, and the wind brought the smell of the sea. The house that she once loved now felt like a stranger. The walls seemed cold, the furniture foreign, and the silence oppressive. Tyler left a month ago, leaving behind only empty bottles and a stack of bills. He had mortgaged the house to cover the debts he had accumulated since his dismissal loans he took out for cars, a yacht, even for gambling, which Savannah did not know about. The bank sent a notice of possible repossession of the house, and that was the last straw. Her office closed, her clients left, and her savings melted like snow in spring. She was alone, and this loneliness was like a knife stuck in her chest. She tried to hold on for Ethan's sake, but he was moving away every day. His anxiety did not go away, but he began to talk more. His phrases were short but precise. He looked at her with the same clarity as that evening when he said, "You broke Daddy." Savannah knew that he wanted his father, and it killed her. She couldn't hold him, but she couldn't let him go either. The custody trial was her last attempt to keep something of her family, but she knew the chances were slim. Chloe, who lives with Michael, has not spoken to her mother since that day at the cemetery. Her letter, left before her escape, was the last thing she said to Savannah. Chloe had no regrets, but sometimes, in the silence of the night, she thought about her mother, not about the one who betrayed her, but about the one who sang lullabies to her. These memories were like fragments that she could not put back together. She focused on her studies, on helping her father at Shoreline, on Ethan, whom she saw on weekends. She wanted him to be with them so that their family, albeit incomplete, would be together. Ethan, still living with Savannah, began talking more often. His words were rare, but every sentence was like a step forward. He talked about puzzles, about the sea, about Dad. Savannah listened, her heart sank, but she did not know how to answer. She saw him looking at her suitcases. She began to pack her things, preparing for a possible move if the house was taken away. Ethan didn't ask, but his eyes said it all. The trial was held in the old Mayflower courthouse, its wooden benches creaking and its windows letting in cold light. Michael sat next to his lawyer, Mark Levy, an experienced lawyer who knew how to handle custody cases. Michael was wearing a dark suit, his face was calm, but his hands clasped in his lap showed tension. Chloe sat in the front row, her gaze glued to her father, a mixture of pride and worry in her eyes. Ethan was in the room, but he was brought in separately with a social worker so he wouldn't feel pressured. Savannah was the last to enter, her black dress simple and her hair pulled back into a low ponytail. She looked tired, her skin was pale, and there were shadows under her eyes. Her lawyer, a young woman named Caitlin, was less experienced than Mark, and it showed in her nervous gestures. Savannah looked at Michael, then at Chloe, but her gaze quickly dropped. She knew she had lost before she even started. The judge, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, began the hearing. Mark presented Michael's case, his stable income, thriving business, the apartment where Chloe already lives, and his ability to provide care for Ethan, including therapy for his special needs. He mentioned Michael's success as a father, his regular visits with Ethan, his support of Chloe. Mark then turned to Savannah and his voice became harsher. "Miss Wells," he said, deliberately using her maiden name, "has neither a job nor a home. Her property is under threat of foreclosure due to debts accumulated by her partner, Tyler Reed. She cannot provide stability for Ethan, whose condition requires special attention. Moreover, her relationship with her children, especially Chloe, is destroyed, as evidence confirms." Caitlin tried to argue, arguing that Savannah was a mother who always took care of her children, that her financial difficulties were temporary, that she was working on rebuilding her business. But her arguments were weak, and the documents she presented could not hide the truth. Savannah was on the verge of bankruptcy, her house was mortgaged, and her reputation in the Mayflower was ruined. The social worker who spoke about Ethan's condition. He noted that Ethan began to talk more in front of his father, that his anxiety decreased during visits to Michael, and that Chloe living with her father was a positive influence. He added that Savannah's house, with its unstable atmosphere and Tyler's presence before he left, was harmful to Ethan. The judge listened intently, her pen moving across her notepad. When it was time to listen to Ethan, the room fell silent. He was led into the hall, His thin figure seemed even smaller in a gray sweater. He sat up, his eyes downcast and his fingers fiddling with the edge of his sleeve. The judge asked softly, "Ethan, where do you want to live? With Mom or Dad?" Ethan was silent for several seconds, his breathing uneven. Then he looked up, looked at Michael, then at Savannah. His voice, hoarse but clear, sounded in the silence. "With Dad and Chloe." Savannah closed her eyes, her face turning chalk white. Chloe clenched her fists, her lips twitched, but she didn't look away. Michael looked at his son, his heart pounding, but he held on. The judge nodded, her face unreadable. She asked a few more questions, but Ethan's answer was decisive. An hour later, she announced the decision. Full custody of Ethan was transferred to Michael Harris. Savannah is granted visitation rights, but with the condition that she provides stable conditions. The meeting ended, and the hall was filled with the rustle of footsteps. Michael and Chloe were waiting for Ethan in the hallway. When he came out, his eyes were clear, and he walked towards his father, his hand finding Michael's. Chloe hugged her brother, her voice quiet. "We're together now, baby." Savannah was the last to leave. Her lawyer tried to say something, but she waved it off. She looked at Michael, Chloe, and Ethan standing together, and her lips pursed. She didn't say anything, didn't cry, didn't try to come over. She simply turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a metronome. Ethan moved in with Michael a week later. His room in the apartment was small but cozy, with shelves for puzzles and a window overlooking the ocean. He began to talk more, his sentences became longer, and sometimes he even smiled, especially when Chloe joked or Michael read to him before bed. The anxiety did not go away, but it became quieter, like the sea after a storm. Chloe, preparing for college, found the strength to move forward. She still hated her mother, but her anger became quieter, like coals that smolder but do not burn. She helped Ethan with his homework, worked at Shoreline on the weekends, and her life began to take shape. Michael looked at the children and felt that, despite everything, he had done the right thing. His revenge destroyed Savannah and Tyler, but gave him a family. He wasn't happy about her fall, it was too empty, but he was grateful for Ethan, for Chloe, for their new, fragile home. Savannah rented a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the Mayflower. Her belongings fit into 3 boxes. The Harris house was sold by the bank to pay off Tyler's debts, and she received nothing. She worked as a receptionist at a local hotel. Her salary was barely enough to pay rent. Tyler disappeared. Rumors said he had left town, but no one knew where. Savannah wasn't looking for him. She didn't look for the children either, knowing that they didn't want to see her. Every night she sat by the window, looking at the distant ocean, and her loneliness was like a shadow that never left. She thought about Chloe, about Ethan, about Michael. She thought about her letter, about Ethan's words, about Michael's look at the trial. She didn't cry, but her hands shook as she poured herself tea. Her gaze was lost. She was alone, and this was her punishment. Michael, Chloe, and Ethan sat in their apartment, the ocean roaring outside the window. Ethan was putting together a puzzle, Chloe was flipping through her textbook, and Michael was preparing dinner. They didn't talk about Savannah, they didn't talk about the trial, but their silence was warm, like the light of a lamp over the table. They were family, and that was enough. The Mayflower lived its own life, its streets filled with the warmth of spring, but its shadows kept stories. The Harrises' story had been about pain, about revenge, about loneliness, but now it was also about hope, about how a family, even a broken one, can find a way home. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.